The perfect conditions. The wind was gently puffing offshore. The tide was coming in. Waves shoulder to head high at a left point break in Costa Rica. And the water temperature was a balmy 80 degrees. I could hear her joy and laughter from the shore as she refused to come in after 3 long hours. These were the perfect conditions for my daughter and husband to spend the morning together on his longboard, surfing wave after wave. The perfect conditions, but life is not always full of the perfect conditions. Think about what makes for the perfect conditions in your life, for your work. As a Black leader and mentor to the next generations of leaders in my community, I am really concerned about how conditions impact our survival. And I've looked at the research on species extinction, and there are some provocative parallels. Let me share with you what I mean. For example, geographic information systems mapping helps ecologists, urban planners, environmental scientists, public health professionals, and other sectors take a look at geographical features and ultimately conditions. GIS mapping reveals relationships and trends and complex geographical connections. Essentially, it helps us gain a deeper insight into context and interactions occurring across geographic areas and region. So imagine for a minute, you survey the landscape of industry leaders, college presidents, powerful foundations, and Fortune 500 companies to examine how healthy these environments are for Black chief executive officers. In addition to GIS mapping, we also want to consider the environmental threat factors. The IUCN Red List of Threatened Species defines 9 levels of conservation status by severity. 7 of the 9 refer directly to threat level. So extinct, extinct in the wild, critically endangered, vulnerable, near threatened, and least concern. Species become endangered by extinction for 2 main reasons: loss of genetic variation and loss of habitat. A simple example of this habitat threat is the Erebus macdonaldiana, or Red Mountain rockcress. This delicate purple flower, indigenous to Northern California and Oregon, had the misfortune of thriving in magnesium and nickel-rich soil. The rockcress couldn't stand a chance against the mining industry of the 70s and 80s and capitalism, and today it's still considered endangered. So my focus today is habitat as it relates to inhospitable environments and conditions impacting or determining the factors that make Black leaders vulnerable, endangered, and critically endangered in professional spaces. So a habitat is defined as a place or environment where a plant or animal naturally or normally lives and grows. And we all know for a particular demographic of any given human population to succeed, there needs to at least be a baseline of opportunity. So when we look at it from a socio-historical perspective, W.E.B. Du Bois, in his 1935 seminal work, Black Reconstruction, explains how a lack of hospitable habitat can harm. Du Bois debunks the biased, hysterical narrative around the Civil War and Reconstruction. He also links slavery to American capitalism and explains how institutional racism in the form of Jim Crow laws hindered Black progress, not to mention the associated racial terror and violence that Black people suffered. So the Reconstruction failed to provide the sustainable socioeconomic habitat that included land ownership, political representation, economic prosperity, and even acknowledged legal rights for Black people. It would take another century for the nation to begin to live up to the promise of the Reconstruction. And even today, how hospitable is the habitat? Look what our forefather had to say about racism and allyship. Despite the institutional racism, Du Bois acknowledges that on the most human level, and despite skin tones, the white folks who dared to think differently. So as a society, we have the power to shape our sociocultural habitat. Creatively, we can use conservationist criteria to elucidate challenges people face in social contexts. The criteria will include population reduction rate, geographic range, population size, population restriction, and the probability of extinction. So I put it to you in your own professions. Are Black leaders' population declining, or do you think they're increasing? Let's see a show of hands. How many folks think it is increasing? How many would say declining? Okay. And in the case you are curious, here are some stats. In your own industries, would you consider Black leaders thriving or endangered? Let's see a show of hands. How many would say thriving? How many say endangered? And just for fun, how many of you have worked with a successful Black leader? Thank y'all for raising your hand. Author Michael J. Benton describes extinction as a foolish series of actions that selfish people, in many cases in which they were warned. And they were warned of the consequence of their actions in destroying life. He suggests by understanding extinction, we also get to imagine de-extinction. And by imagining the de-extinction of Black leaders, we might even design a system that leads to their success. So in my analogy, the concept of endangered species is less about the organism and more about the sustaining environments that they're in. So species often become endangered when the environment no longer can sustain them. So I'm not comparing leaders to species, very important. It is more about focusing on the hospitable environment and success conditions. Who cares if the spotted owl has dark or light spots? Who cares if some of them are a little darker than others when their key to survival, their physical survival, isn't about the shades of color, it's about the chemicals in the local water supply that are killing them. If we take the analogy to the workplace, focusing on the physical environment helps us to consider the conditions conducive for success and alleviates just for a moment our biases of race, gender, even ability. If we apply principles of conservation, we can reveal an ecosystem of racism and then explore ways to restore justice, integrity, and humanity. Using an environmental design method, we are able to tap into the unethical underpinnings in which environments where Black leaders are least successful. So a Black leader, like any leader, is ready, prepared, skilled, and moving into their role with the best intentions. And we know not everyone is cut out to be a leader. These folks, regardless of skin tone, should move on. So let's let them go. I'm focused on asking you to consider the many, many Black leaders who are ready, who are dedicated, and are well adapted and suited for leadership. I might even say naturally suited and perfectly adapted to their environments. So why do these natural-born leaders become so stressed in an environment they are suited for? How is it they become endangered? So let's think about this. We do not question a plant's will to survive or a flower's desire to bloom, a raccoon's need for a warm place to sleep, lately under my back deck, or a bird's deep urge to nest. When these things are upset or upturned, it's not about them. Look for the environmental condition negatively impacting them. The flower didn't bloom because it wasn't getting enough water. The raccoon did not sleep well because my husband installed wire mesh under our deck. Right? So assess your workplace environment and think about what conditions you can create for Black leaders' success. Allies of Black leaders, they're conscious in the environments that they create. They choose ethical behavior to create an environment that removes negativity and unhealthy competition. The success condition framework that I am developing leads to healthy habitats. When a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment it grows in, not the flower. Today, leave with an awareness of racism as an environmental threat and determine your individual role in creating a hospitable habitat for Black leaders. While perfect conditions is an idealistic goal, I hope we can at least fall short to maintain hospitable conditions and improve from there. Thank you.